Excellent.
Already? So, okay. Well, thank you for inviting me to talk, and thank you all for joining me tonight for the talk. I've been making glass for about 30 plus years now, and for the first 15 years of my career, I used to make figurative work, and for various different reasons, which I don't really have time to go into here, I made a drastic change around 2005, and that's where I'm going to start my talk. And yeah, that sort of first 15 years, I kind of saw as me looking inwards. So it was very much to do with me expressing things from inside me. But when I made this change, I started looking outwards, looking at the sort of landscape around me. And one of the things that I was particularly interested in was light and the way that light interacts with things. And this was obviously a kind of complementary thing for working with glass. So I wanted to start exploring the relationship between light and material, along with form and colour, and how those four different elements relate to each other and kind of interact. So I started making these sort of very geometric forms through which I would explore these kind of ideas. So not always particularly using a sort of traditional idea of what glass is, transparent and shiny. So, you know, also trying to sort of look at different ways of using different types of glass. So in this particular piece, you've got two opaque glasses, black and white, and yet light still permeated through this, the top piece of this. It's my pointer doesn't work, does it? No. So the light that you can see in this piece is not in the piece. It's light that is coming through the top part and just illuminating the bottom of that piece. In this piece, using one single colour on the top, which is that deep orange red, and by the base is the same kind of white opaque glass that you saw in that previous piece, but in this piece the light is transmitted through the coloured piece onto the white surface. So all that kind of yellow that you see kind of underneath is the sort of, it's the light shadow, if you like. So that piece is actually white, and that's just the light that's coming through the top that's been transmitted through and onto that surface. So a lot of the images that I show you will have a sort of be like a double image with, and it's just to kind of give you an idea of sort of thing that I'm looking at that kind of inspires me to make this work. This is not the best of slides, but the reason I put it in was because it's the first piece that I've made that uses frit. So if you don't know what frit is, it's really just broken pieces of glass. So, you know, that can be quite large chunks, or it can be really sort of small powdered kind of pieces of glass. So this was the first time I used it, but I also put it in because the bottom part of this piece is completely clear. The colour that you see in that piece is a direct transmission of the light through the top that's then reflected and refracted and absorbed into that kind of milky, cloudy kind of effect that is created by the frit. This is a piece that I made for Biennale back in around 2010, and by this time the work has obviously got a lot more complex and sophisticated. So it's actually made up of 6 separately cast pieces of glass. Oh, by the way, that's the technique that I use, is lost wax casting. So pretty much everything that you see in terms of glass here is using that technique of lost wax casting. So yeah, it's made up of 6 individually cast pieces that are then finished, then assembled, and then refinished. So, excuse me. And as the work's progressed, you can see that sort of vessel element is becoming more of a sort of motif rather than a dominant part of the piece. So that blue right at the top of this piece has a very shallow dish shape in the top, and it's just like a sort of nod to that kind of where these pieces have evolved. And I put this in just to show it's the same piece, it's just been lit differently, so you can see how that relationship between glass and light is so fundamental. You know, how you light it really changes the way it looks or can look. And that's just to give you an idea of scale. Yeah, that was about 10 years ago when I had a bit more hair and a lot less grey. So I don't just look at sort of the sublime, so, you know, sunsets and beautiful cloud formations and, you know, that kind of thing. I'm just interested in light and where I find light interesting. And this image on the left is just a set of Venetian, of vertical blinds where daylight is just coming through, and I just find that sort of, you know, really quite beautiful. And, you know, the other thing that I should sort of say as well is that I'm not actually trying to reproduce anything that I make. I'm not trying to create a landscape or a skyscape or anything like that. What I'm trying to do is take the essence of something, what it is that I find, you know, interesting or fascinating about something, and then distill that into, you know, the objects that I make. So, so yeah, that's kind of, you know, my sort of philosophy. So in this piece, I'm using a combination of clear glass, coarse frit, powdered frit, and then layering that into the mold. And as it casts, the glass starts to move and creates these beautiful kind of swirling, kind of cloud-like structures and forms within the glass. Also, this was one of the first sort of oblong shaped pieces that I made. Up until this time, everything was kind of based on circles, cylinders, cones, that kind of thing. And this is the first sort of move in a slightly different direction, still geometric, but the beginning of a very sort of long series of work that I'm still making to this day. So another example of piece using different types of glass, clear and frit, and various kind of greys of frit. So at some point in the sort of mid 2010s somewhere, this kind of form evolved to gain this kind of addition of these little top elements that have become a sort of motif in the work. They kind of evolved actually from previous pieces, like the very early pieces that you saw, the bowl forms. These are a kind of reinterpretation of that form. So this is something that I do quite a lot in my work, is I make forms, spheres, cylinders, bowl forms, cones, that kind of thing, and then I reshape them and reinterpret them and try and reimagine them in different pieces. The image on the left is light coming through a skylight on a frosty morning. So it's just ice that's stuck to a skylight. And I just think it's really beautiful, and it reminded me so much of like little glass crystals. So the piece on the right is made entirely using one type of frit, sort of a fine frit, but using clear and colour, and then casting them so that they kind of blend together. So for a long time I was casting these kind of pieces through the bottom, so had very little control over how the colour graded and changed from one part of the piece to the other. And it was effective for a while, but I wanted a little bit more control. So I started casting them horizontally. So, the glass where you place it in the mold wouldn't move very far. So you could create these really sort of gradual changes of color to clear, and just gave me a lot more control over the work. I think made them more effective as pieces as well. So you can see I'm using repeating the same forms quite a lot, and then using those forms almost like a vehicle to explore different qualities of glass, different effects within the glass. So these two pieces were made using the same glass. In one, it was cast, on the one on the left, it was cast sort of vertically from the base. So as the more the glass moves, the more stretched and kind of billowy it becomes. Whereas the one on the right, all the bits of glass were laid into the mold sort of horizontally. So they didn't really move very far. They just kind of basically melted up against each other, and where they melted together formed these lovely kind of veils. This piece was a double firing, so it was made very similar to one of the previous pieces where the colour was graded, very sort of, clean, no kind of real movement in the piece, but there was a problem with the piece that I had to recast it. But when it recast, all the colour started to move and change. I don't know whether that has something to do with the colour itself, that actually the heat kind of, makes it move in a different way to clear. I'm not sure, but anyway, it created these beautiful sort of almost like an X-ray type effect in the glass. You get a lot of accidents with glass, so most of the time they don't really work for you, but when they do, you really got to grab it with both hands. So these were both made using sheet glass. So it's a glass from Bullseye, which called Tector, and it has one, both sides polished, but one side is quite textured. So by layering the sheets of glass into the mold so that they butt right up against each other, they don't move very far, but when they do melt, they trap very small pockets of air, and as the glass melts, they just turn into bubbles. But because it hasn't moved very far, creates these kind of strings of bubbles, almost like a kind of raindrop effect. This was my 2006, 15 or 16 Biennale piece, and probably one of the pieces that really best encapsulates that sort of idea of form, color, light, and material. I think this piece of all my pieces really embodies that kind of relationship, because it's cast with the sort of main body, that color is all one single color. There's no variation in that color. It's just that it's like a wedge shape. At the top, it's about 3 millimeters thick, and at the bottom, it's about 12 centimeters. So that gradation of color is completely analog in the way that it changes, but it's all one single color. And I love the way that one single color can look like so many different colors. This is a similar piece, but it goes from top left corner to bottom right corner, as from thin to thick. This was my 2019 Biennale piece, and it's kind of an evolution of that previous piece, but I'm trying to create the same idea and the same sort of principle, but within a sphere. So it's actually two halves of a sphere, hollow inside, that have then been glued together. And the core, the inside bit, has been off-centered. So the top of the sphere is really thin, like 3 or 4 millimeters. And then the bottom is really thick, maybe 1.5 inches, 2 inches. And that's what gives it that sort of beautiful kind of gradation of color from yellow to that really dark red. This was also the piece that you gave me a prize for at the Biennale. And then just quickly to finish, a few pieces of the work I've been doing during lockdown. So January last year, I went to Seville when we still could get on an aeroplane and go somewhere. And that flight was kind of, late evening, and I was sitting right next to the engine, and the sunset, as it was going down, started to illuminate the engine, and it was so beautiful. It was really, really stunning, and that kind of inspired me to make a series of work. It sat with me for quite a long time, these images, but it was only when we went into lockdown and I had the time and the space to make some new work that sort of came out. So these pieces are about 35 centimeters in diameter. So yeah, reasonably large. This one is hollow. It's And it's been made using powdered glass, which is like icing sugar. And this is the smallest piece I've ever made, and the most recent piece that I've finished, and is also a piece that I think really embodies that idea of colour, form, light, and material in a very different way to, you know, the other pieces. But yeah, I just one of my favourite images actually of the work that I've made. But and just finish a little video of the process that I do. So you're hopefully not too bored. We'll do this, and then if anybody's got any questions after that. That's it.
You can unshare your screen.
There we go.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
Bruno, you said that when you were first working, you were working from the inside out, and then you moved to looking at the outside and in. Did it make you feel differently as a person?
Where have we gone? Shall I press the camera?
Wow.
We're not there.
That's a really difficult question to answer. I mean, one of the reasons that I decided that, well, one of the contributing factors in changing was, you know, I was starting to feel uncomfortable with showing my inner self. And, you know, I would sometimes look at my work, you know, in exhibitions, and it was becoming uncomfortable for me because of what it meant to me. And I think I got to a point where I didn't feel like I needed to do that anymore. So yeah, I mean, there was a lot of other reasons that kind of contributed to that decision. It wasn't something that just happened overnight. It was a couple of years from, you know, first catalyst, if you like. But I don't think it changed me as a person, but I think I felt happier in my work.
Yes. Thank you. I mean, light does do that to you, makes you feel different. Yes.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Clearly, light and its effects on glass are a real inspiration to you now. And I was fascinated by that. The technicalities, the complexities of casting those pieces, quite astonishing.
Yeah, yeah. There's an awful lot of work that goes into them, and so many different processes from start to finish. It's not just one thing.
Hold on to that imagination throughout the process is really a huge achievement.
But you see, I love the process because the process also informs the work. It informs a lot of the ideas, especially, when you start. I haven't shown a lot of them in these slides, but when you start thinking about the inside of the piece of glass, and you start thinking about the negative space within the glass, that has a lot to do also with the process, because with glass casting, you're constantly going from positive to negative through different materials to end up with your ultimate piece in glass. So that idea of positive and negative has always been something that's been, even when I was making the figurative work, in fact probably more so then, part of the work as well.
Do you find that sometimes what you perceive or imagine you want to do is limited by the equipment you've got, and therefore you have to go out shopping for new toys?
Once upon a time, definitely, but I've generally got everything that I need to make my work, and I'm lucky enough at the moment that if there was something that I really needed, I could afford to buy it. I should be able to buy it. The most recent thing that I bought was a diamond saw, which actually sounds like probably quite a basic piece of equipment, and it is for a lot of glass makers. But I was cutting all my glass for nearly 25 years just with a little sort of angle grinder type machine. The same machine that you saw me grinding with was something like that, but with like a small diamond disc. And it was, it did the job, but it wasn't very accurate, and it wasn't very safe, if you like. You could easily damage the glass with it. But yeah, about a year ago, I bought myself a diamond saw for the first time, and I just wish I'd done it, 10 years ago. So.
What sort of investment was that?
About £1,500.
Oh, yeah.
£1,500.
Usually the most expensive thing that you will buy is a kiln. That's generally the most expensive thing. And I'm still using the kiln I bought in 1996, and it was £5,000 back then. And I'm still using it. I've refurbished it myself in between, but it is still the same. It's still pretty much the same frame.
And if you were to replace it, how much would it cost?
Probably nearer to 10 now. So yeah, I'm trying to look after it as best I can.
Bruno, can I ask, it seemed that you were using the kiln for some 3 weeks at one point to allow the glass to soften, presumably from the slabs that you put in. Is that right?
So the actual casting, so that softening process is actually fairly quick. So what I tend to do is load my kiln at the end of the day. So 4 or 5 o'clock before I go home, that's when I turn my kiln on, and I program it to come up to temperature for the following morning, so that at like 8 o'clock, 8:30, it'll be at 840, 850 degrees, which is a sort of average casting temperature. So it only takes 12, 14 hours. You can do it quicker, but that's how I program mine, for it to get up to that casting temperature. And the reason I do that is because I want to be able to look inside the kiln. I want to be able to check everything's okay, that the molds haven't broken, that there's enough glass, all those kind of things. The reason it takes 3 weeks is because for a big thick piece like you saw there, you have to cool it down really slowly. So thin, small pieces can be in and out of the kiln in 3 or 4 days, sort of max. But then a big piece like that, yeah, you're looking at 3 weeks just on the cooling cycle, because otherwise it will crack. So I think the longest firing that I've done was 3 months, and that was for a solid sphere.
And you don't want to take that out prematurely, do you?
No, and you know, it's a massive investment though when you're doing pieces like that, because you know, glass is such a difficult material and things go wrong all the time. I mean, it doesn't matter how good you are, you know, you're going to have, you know, things go wrong. It's just the nature of the material and the process. And, you know, when you've invested that much time and effort into making a piece, if it doesn't work, you know, it can actually be really soul destroying.
Bruno, I can see
when it works, it's, you know, it's rewarding.
Bruno, I can see from online that your work takes approximately four weeks to 4 months per piece.
Yeah.
I can partly understand that from the video that you did of the process and how intricate it is. I'm just wondering though, so you know, a piece that takes 4 months to actually complete, just in terms of the number of hours that you put into that piece, because you've got the time where it's sitting in the kiln.
Yeah.
But how long do you actually spend on a piece?
On actually physically working on a piece, and
yeah,
that varies from piece to piece, but it's a lot less. So you know, there's a lot of process where you know, things are happening to the glass when you're not actually touching it. So the firing, you know, that's an awful long period of time where you're not actually physically working on the piece. And, you know, during those times, you're working on something else. You know, when it's polishing on that machine that you saw jiggling about, you know, it's usually on there for a couple of days, just polishing, grinding and polishing. So, you know, that's all time that you spend, you know, on the physical side of making something else, whether it's, you know, one of the core pieces, the coloured core pieces that go into a piece, or a completely separate piece. Yeah, so I would say probably between a week and 2 weeks, maybe, actual physical work.
Well,
depending on the piece. You know, some maybe a bit more, some maybe a bit less. But
Bruno, do the pieces always turn out the way you envisage them?
No.
Or do they surprise you?
They're constantly surprising. That's another reason why I really enjoy the work that I'm doing at the moment, is because, you know, can never be 100% sure how they're coming out. And, you know, I just like to try new things. I like to experiment. I like to, when you can see from the work that I've shown you, which is very small percentage of what I've done over the last 20 years, you know, there's a lot of different ideas, if you like, in the glass. There's a lot of similar forms, and the forms tend to sort of evolve quite sort of slowly and gradually, but the ideas that I'm trying to express or, you know, put through the glass are quite varied. So, you know, that's part of what I enjoy about it, is not knowing, you know, is the unpredictability of what I'm doing now. Whereas, you know, I'd also got to a point with the figurative work where just knew what the work was going to come out like. There was no, I'd lost that sense of anticipation when I opened the kiln because it was so predictable.
Fascinating.
The two pieces that you made, you said one had been loaded horizontally and the other one vertically. Where the lines came together, forgive my ignorance, would you describe that as devitrification, where the two come together?
Yeah, it is, and it's because of that particular type of glass. It's a borosilicate glass. I think you were talking about borosilicate.
Yeah, yes.
So they're like little pellets of glass. They're all exactly the same size and weight, and they're all perfectly clear. But because of that particular type of glass, it's called BK7, when it gets to a certain temperature, the surface starts to devit. So even though it's perfectly clear, when the two surfaces meet, it's got that sort of devit surface in the middle, creating those, either that grid-like form or those lovely stretched out kind of, you know, plumes.
Like champagne bubbles.
Yeah, lovely, lovely.
Yeah. Whereas most glass, like lead glass or the bullseye type glass, you know, when you've got two clear pieces of glass together, you don't really see a join at all, which is really good as well, because if you're trying to make a really beautiful optical piece with very little, you know, going on, then you need that reliability of how it sort of melts together as well, because it's very rare that you actually cast with one single piece of glass.
So do you manage to satisfy the demand, or have you got more stock than you've managed to dispose of?
I've got more stock at the moment because there's not really been much going on for the last year. So, I mean, you know, I've been lucky that I've been able to work throughout lockdown because, you know, I would have gone mad otherwise. So I know it's been difficult for a lot of people as well. So I'm really grateful to have been able to do that. But on the other hand, I have got quite a bit of work now. So I'm really looking forward to the art fairs taking off again and exhibitions, and, you know, so yeah.
When's the first one booked?
So my art dealer is doing an exhibition in April. No, it's May. It's May. Delivery's April, but the exhibition's in May at Parham House.
Sussex.
Yeah, it looks stunning. I've only seen pictures that they've sent of the house.
It's wonderful.
Fabulous. It looks fabulous, and
lovely venue.
Quite traditional. It looks like it's a beautiful setting for contemporary art, because it's that contrast of, you know, old and new. I love it. We had one exhibition in that sort of brief period where things were a little bit sort of more relaxed last year, and it was at a house in Cavendish Square. It was quite an old, fairly run-down house, but you could see all the old grandeur that used to be there. But, you know, it had obviously fallen into ruin, and, you know, all the sort of plaster walls were kind of peeling, and some of the floorboards were showing, and it was, you know, it was really atmospheric, and you'd think, oh God, that sounds a bit, but it was an absolutely beautiful setting for contemporary, you know, work, ceramics and glass and metal work. So, you know, it really worked. So I think this is going to have a very similar kind of feel to it.
The prize that the piece that you won the prize for in the 2019 Biennale, that went to America, didn't it?
It did. I should have mentioned that was bought by the Imagine Museum in Florida.
Do you find the American market is a big place for you to sell?
No, it's a difficult market. It's a really difficult market. If so, my main sort of art dealer is Adrian Sassoon, and he takes our work there twice a year on a normal year to New York, and yeah, I mean I sell reasonably well there, but it's just 2 art fairs a year. Getting into American galleries is quite difficult. You know, so I have one in it's called Habitat Galleries, and also in Florida, and they're quite good for me. But you know, it's bits and pieces. You know.
What about Europe?
Europe, I think, is better. I mean, you know, 90% of what I sell is through Adrian Sassoon, and then the rest is really through other sort of galleries that I have here and there, or from one-off exhibitions that are taking place. Just had a group exhibition it began in Taiwan, in Taipei, and then just recently finished in Shanghai, and that went really well. So yeah, it's kind of a mixture. But Adrian is my main sort of outlet for sales, and he takes work to New York. Maastricht is one of the biggest art fairs in the world. A couple in London. There's about 5 or 6 art fairs a year, and most of my work is sort of geared towards that.
Fascinating.
I imagine that Japan might be an interesting place to investigate, actually.
I think you're right as
Work might go down very well.
I think you're right. I mean, I'd love to go to Japan, actually. It's actually next on my list of places I'd like to visit. So that is something that I'd like to do in the next kind of, you know, couple of years, I think. And yeah.
It was a total revelation to me, actually, seeing the processes. I think your work is exquisitely beautiful.
Thank you.
And I think, you know, it deserves to be flying off the shelves.
Thank you very much.
What are you working on at the moment?
So I've got a couple of pieces. Well, I've got a commission piece that I'm just finishing, and a couple of pieces for this Parham House exhibition. I'm also kind of developing, you know, that last sort of few slides that you saw, sort of developing that work a little bit further. I've applied for a couple of glass prizes. There's one in Japan, actually, in Toyama. That's an international prize and exhibition, a bit like the Biennale, but it's an international prize. But that's not announced until April, so won't know about that until then. Another one in Belgium. There's always, you know, things going on. I also do work for other artists, and I do other jobs as well, sort of what I call my bread and butter. So I do a whole load of BAFTAs every year. So I don't know if you ever watched the televised BAFTA ceremony. Every year they give a prize it's called the Rising Star Award. So it's the only award that's not in bronze, and it's in glass. And for the last sort of 15, 16 years since that prize was introduced, I've been making those glass BAFTAs. But throughout the year, I can make up to 10 BAFTAs a year, because they do these award ceremonies, throughout the year. They're just not televised. So, for different parts of the film and TV industry. So that's quite good. That's really good kind of money. And yeah, and do other artists sometimes come to me for, they're not glass makers, they might be sculptors or ceramists or something, and they want something making in glass, and they come to somebody like me, and I just sort of, act as like a technician, really, to make their work into glass. So
amazing.
Do you have particular collectors who sort of hang around your studio and get under your feet?
Groupies.
They do what? Get under my feet?
Yes, yes.
I think Barbara wants to know if you've got groupies.
Yes.
I do have people come and visit occasionally. It's not something that happens very often. I don't mind when people want to come and have a look. I'm always happy to show people around the studio. It gives me an excuse to clean up. But I generally, if somebody wants to buy a piece of work, I generally try and guide them towards my dealer, because galleries and dealers don't really like collectors coming direct to the artist, and it's understandable. They spend a lot of time and money promoting you and your work, so it's not good for you to kind of cut them out. So
no, it's a partnership.
But if people want to come and have a look what I'm doing, that's fine. So
how many can you accommodate?
Probably 5 would be okay.
Can we come in groups?
No more than 5.
Okay.
Can we bring our own wine?
I'm not sure that's a good idea in a glass studio.
Yeah.
And is there a pub nearby?
There is, yeah. You'd be welcome to do a studio tour sometime.
Okay.
Not that exciting, I'm afraid. It's not like a glass blowing studio, though.
Well, we might hold you to that. Worth a thought.
You'd be welcome.
I think we'll wind up, Bill.
Yeah, Bruno, I think we've taken up enough of your valuable time.
Thank you, that's fine.
Thank you so much for a fascinating talk and discussion.
My pleasure.
The range of your imagination and the extent of your glass-making skills are truly astonishing.
Thank you.
And the pieces you showed us are absolutely beautiful, and one would love to see them in the flesh, so to speak. With your imaginative use of light and colour and texture, they are truly astonishing.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we are very proud as the Glass Sellers Company to be associated with such a distinguished glass artist.
Yeah, yeah.
Really good of you to share
Thank you very much
time with us.
It's
Thank
been a
you
pleasure.
all for attending, and bid you all good night, and a final thank you to Bruno. Thank you.
Well, Bruno.
So much.
Just on a closing note, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Next week we are going to have the history of the Contemporary Glass Society, which will be quite interesting, delivered by their secretary and chairman. So I'll send the details out over the weekend, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and thank you, Bruno, so much. Much
Yeah.
appreciated.
Thank you, Bruno.
Thank you, Bruno.
Thank you, Bruno.